up, everybody? It's Gustavo with Omega Pools, back again. Today we're going to be teaching you about chemistry. We're going to learn how to take care of these beautiful pools that y'all have purchased from Omega Pools, making sure that y'all ensure that it looks as new as possible for many years to come. So again, it's pretty simple stuff. Let's get started with it. So these are the test strips that I'm going to recommend. This makes my life very simple. You don't have to go to the store and get it tested. You don't have to use the old school drops. This is the most accurate way that I have found in my years of building pools. When it comes to testing pools, this is pretty accurate. So very simple. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cubes on this strip, and those 6 cubes line up with these 6 rows that mean they're different chemicals on this chart. Okay, the very first cube on this strip is going to be the very first row of chemicals right here. It's your total hardness. If you pay attention real close right here to the side of the container, it shows your thumb. It represents the strip and your thumb right there. So basically that's your thumb holding the strip. There's the strip, and first cube goes for the first row, second cube second row, and so on. Okay, this is really important because I could not even put it in there, but I want to make sure you get the most accurate reading. You could have easily read the directions on this guy right here, but that's another thing that I do not concur with on the instructions. They say that you got up to 15 seconds to stare at these guys to figure out what's going on. No, I don't suggest more than 10 seconds. Those 5-second difference between what they suggest and what I suggest is a big difference in the result of this strip, okay? So the longer you stare at this strip, the darker those colors get. You don't want to stare at it for more than 10 seconds, okay? So when you dip this strip into the water, you dip. You don't swirl, because I see this all the time. And when you come up, you don't shake it off, because I see this all the time, okay? You make sure that you dip and you come up clean. You give it about 2 to 3 seconds for them to change their colors, and then you start to compare. Once you start to compare, it shouldn't take you more than about 7 to 8 seconds. I'm talking about a 10-second window from the second that you dip it to the second that you figure out what you need to do with this pool, okay? So again, don't swirl and don't shake. Just dip it. Here we go. I'm gonna show you the example. So I'm gonna come over here, and it doesn't matter if it's the pool, it doesn't matter if it's a spa. It's the same water, okay? We're gonna dip it just like that. We're gonna come back up. You see the colors start changing, and then you take that strip and you start to compare your colors accordingly. And again, it shouldn't take you more than 10 seconds. Once you do this a few times, you'll get the hang of it. So anyways, before we go testing the water, before we go dipping this strip, we're gonna talk about what each little cube represents. Now, we're not gonna go in the necessary order here from first to last, okay? I'm gonna kind of jump around, and I'm gonna explain it the way that I think makes the most sense here. So first things first is pH. pH levels in the pool have to be on the money for your readings of any other chemical in the pool to be right. So if you want the accurate reading, you want to make sure that first of all you start off with the right pH in the pool. So if you have a new pool, you are going to be adding muriatic acid, also known as hydrochloric acid, into your pool constantly. It can be anywhere from half a gallon to an entire gallon. It's going to be, the newer the pool, the more it's going to need. The older the pool, the less it's going to need. So typically on a new pool, the average curing time is typically going to be between 3 to 6 months, okay? During those 3 to 6 months, you're going to be releasing a lot of minerals into the pool that are going to make your pH spike. When the pool is done curing, you will know, because you'll go 2 to 3 consecutive weeks of testing the water and the balance coming back showing you that the pH hasn't moved. It's basically flatlined. It has stayed ideal. When you see that happening on your pool, that means that the curing phase is basically over. But until then, you're gonna have to typically be adding anywhere, like I said, from half a gallon. I mean, at this point, getting into almost cured stage, you're gonna be at half a gallon to ounces, maybe a cup. So the closer it gets to curing, the less you're gonna need. And I can't emphasize that enough, because a lot of people that don't get it explained right or don't understand it correctly will just go adding or dumping half a gallon or a gallon of acid into the pool until the day you think it's cured. No, if you go doing that, you're gonna affect another chemical, which we'll talk about in a second or in a little bit, which is alkalinity. You don't want to go putting too much muriatic acid into the pool because it also affects alkalinity. We'll get to that in a minute. Back to pH. So you have a new pool and it's curing. You're gonna be, like I said, you're gonna start off by adding maybe up to a full gallon of acid every week. Then it'll be half a gallon every week. Then it'll come down to a quarter gallon every week. Then it'll become, you know, like I said, cups, pints, down to ounces. Eventually nothing once the pool is cured. But till then, you have to make sure that you stay on top of the pH to get an accurate reading on all your chemicals when you dip this strip into the water, okay? Right here on this chart, it explains to you where your highs, which is on this side of the chart, where your lows are, which is this side of the chart, and where all your ideal colors, which is right down the middle of this chart, okay? Being that we're talking about pH, we're gonna skip down a few rows down here to the fourth row, and we're talking about pH. So we're gonna talk about these numbers. What is considered low, what is considered high, what is considered ideal, okay? So a 6.2 is, as you see here, is considered very low. An 8.4 is very high. And we wanna keep our pH balance between 7.2 and 7.8. Now, why is that, other than keeping the pool balanced? How is it gonna affect you? First of all, you're very sensitive to, if your skin is very sensitive to anything, water, air, whatever it rubs up against. If you get hives, you gotta make sure that your pH is really well balanced. It keeps you from getting the irritated red eye. It keeps you from getting itchy, dry skin. So if you want to swim in a pool that's not itchy, and a pool that's not gonna make your eyes go red, you wanna ensure that you keep your pH balance between 7.2 and 7.8. If it gets too high, the way to bring your pH down, again, is by using your muriatic acid. Here is your muriatic acid, also known as hydrochloric acid. This is what we use to lower your pH in the pools. Now, whenever you pour this guy in the pool, you don't ever want to pour this over shallow areas like your sun shelf, okay? You'll have sun shelves that are only 6 inches deep in water. You'll have benches that are a little bit deeper, steps that are a little bit deeper, but they're still not as deep as the floor of the pool. So always avoid pouring your muriatic acid over your shallow areas like your sun shelves, your steps or benches. Always pour it into the deeper part of the pool, and always pour that amount of muriatic acid as equally distributed as possible throughout the entire perimeter of the pool. You don't want to pour muriatic acid just in one area alone. That's not going to do the job. You want to make sure you take, if it's that half gallon that you're using, make sure that half gallon lasts as much as you can throughout the perimeter of the pool, again, without pouring it into the shallow areas, okay? So using muriatic acid, also known as hydrochloric acid, is what we use to lower your pH. Now, again, as the pool gets closer to curing stage, which is typically about 6 months after we turn the pool over to you, is when you're gonna get really close to not needing too much muriatic acid, if any, at that point. But till then, you're gonna need plenty of muriatic acid around, okay? Now, you're typically not gonna have an issue on having a raised pH. pH comes up on its own, okay? So don't ever worry about bringing pH up. That's one thing you don't have to worry about. Bringing it down is what you have to worry about. And again, you bring it down by pouring muriatic acid into the pool. Now, anytime that you add any of these chemicals into the pool, it's optimal if you can run your pump for at least 12 to 24 hours in high speed to thoroughly mix those chemicals in very well to get an accurate reading 24 hours later. I always recommend, while you're getting to learn your pool, you check your chemicals, your chemical balance 24 hours later after you did your initial chemical treatment. That way you get a complete and clear understanding of what you're doing to the pool. Okay, so always test, always run your filter pump at high speed for minimum 12 to 24 hours, and always test 24 hours later, okay? Now, the next chemical we're gonna talk about, because it is directly affected with muriatic acid, is gonna be your total alkalinity. Total alkalinity is what I consider a pool owner's worst nightmare. Why? Because this chemical right here, this balance, is the one that's responsible for actually causing damage to your equipment and your pool, unlike any of the other chemicals. Yeah, if you don't put chlorine in the pool will turn green. If it turns swamp green, oh well, you drain it, you clean it, start over. But alkalinity, low alkalinity can destroy things that are a lot more expensive, like the interior of your heater. And the interior of your heater is made out of very soft, very vulnerable copper. There's a radiator in there that's made out of 100% copper. And if you run your alkalinity too low for prolonged periods of time, it will start to strip all that copper and deposit it into the pool, eventually causing a hole in the copper radiator, making your heater to leak. And to fix that, you're better off replacing the entire heater, which is pretty expensive. So try for that not to happen. You'll save yourself a lot of money, because not only will you put a hole in the heater, but once you've deposited all that copper into the pool, you've actually stained the pebble with it. So that pretty blue pebble isn't given that same clarity and that same blue brilliance as it was when the pool was turned over to you and brand new. As time has gone by, that copper has stained that pebble, and now the water looks clear, but it looks yellow. Kind of funny looking, but anyways. Again, it's very important that you keep your alkalinity balanced or in check, because it can cost you so much money. Again, so how does that staining occur? It's called metal fallout. So we're going to talk about another process called shocking the pool. During that process, anytime you shock the pool, if there's a high content or any content of copper or metals that are floating in that water, as you shock it, all those metals particles, they fall to the bottom, to the floor, and up the cove of the pool, staining it, putting a yellow tint on it. And the only way you're going to get that yellow tint off is by draining the pool and acid washing it. So there's a chemical that I like to promote. Doesn't matter what name brand, but it's a chemical that most pool services don't use. Only the people that are taking care of their own pools, like homeowners, if they know about it, they use it. And that's called metal out. This is a metal sequestering agent. Okay, this basically takes any and every metal, if it's copper, manganese, iron, any of that stuff that's suspended in the water, it will evaporate it out of the pool to make sure that you don't have staining from metals, okay? So I would recommend that you keep this in your chemical arsenal, okay? This is very important. All these chemicals are very important. They all play a very important role. This one right here is gonna protect your pool from staining from all the metals that you're gonna get in your pool, because you don't necessarily have to get metals from the copper radiator that's in the heater. Every week you're going to be adding water to your pool, and as you add water to your pool, you're reintroducing other metals that are coming in from the mud district, from the tubing and stuff like that. So it's very important that you always treat your pool with this. I would suggest that you actually treat your pool with it before you shock. In a perfect world, you come in and you add this a day or two before you even add your shock, to make sure there's already no metals in the water when you add your shock. Okay, so typically for every 10,000 gallons, I recommend about an ounce for the treatment. If it's a 30,000 gallon pool, I recommend 3 ounces every treatment. Okay, that should help keep most of the metals out of your pool and keep the staining away. So again, to keep stains out of the pool because of metals, you have metal out. Okay, that's a bonus chemical right there. This is stuff that the guys that clean pools don't keep, and if you ask them about it, they might tell you they keep it for you. But if you want to keep your pool looking like new, I suggest y'all watch this video and you do everything yourself, because it's pretty easy. All this should not take you more than 5 minutes a week. Okay, so back to pH and alkalinity. So pH, again, on a pool that's new, is always going to be on the rise. Once the pool finishes curing, that pH is just going to stabilize, and it's not going to move, and it's going to stay ideal for a very long time. The only thing that could probably affect it at that point would be rainstorms, stuff of that matter. Otherwise, that's basically it on pH. Now let's go back to alkalinity. So you're adding muriatic acid to the swimming pool to lower your pH, okay? Now let's say we used this strip, we tested it, we came back with a result, theoretically speaking. And pH was high, and alkalinity was on the high side of okay, which is 180, okay? So pH was about 8.4, which is the reason we're having to treat the pool with muriatic acid to bring it down. But at the same time, as we bring down the pH, we're also going to affect the alkalinity, and that's going to come down. Well, if you don't add too much muriatic acid into your pool, you might have the chance that, being that the alkalinity was already on the high side of good, you might have dropped it to where it's still lingering, still holding on to the good side of this scale. Now, if your alkalinity drops down to low for maybe a day, that's okay. This should rebound back on its own. After a day or two, if this hasn't rebounded back into this area, I strongly suggest that you immediately introduce your alkalinity increaser into your pool and bring that level up, okay? You don't ever want to see alkalinity at 0. If it's at 0, you automatically add your alkalinity increaser. But if it's at low for a day or two, and you see it creeping up, that's okay. But again, ideally, you want to keep your alkalinity between 80 and 120, okay? And again, that's why you don't add too much muriatic acid to the pool once, because then you can affect this guy in a negative way, bringing him down to where you don't want him. If you do bring him down too much, you have the alkalinity increaser, which is this guy right here. It's basically baking soda is what this comes down to, okay? And it's very simple to add to the pool. It's very simple math. So this pool is roughly 30,000 gallons. On the back of this bucket, there's a chart that shows you right here where the gallons of the swimming pool would be. So we look for 30,000 right there. And then depending on what the reading is, let's say we go to test the pool right now and the reading is telling us that we're 30 parts per million low. So we need to, that means we need to come up 30 parts per million to get into the ideal range, right? So we're gonna go here to 30 and we're gonna look for 30 parts per million, which is what we need to come up. And we're gonna cross-reference that, and it shows us 13 pounds. So for a 30,000 gallon pool, for us to come up 30 parts per million, it's telling us that we need our 13 pounds right there, okay? So where does this go right here, this chemical? You can put this in the skimmer. That's where I recommend that you put this. So anytime that you put any chemical in the skimmer, I always suggest that you keep the skimmer basket in play, just in case there's any big clumps in the chemicals. You don't plug up your suction line on your skimmer. But yeah, this is your Alkalinity Plus, and you add this. It's basically baking soda. It's a very fine dust in there, powder. You put this in the skimmer. And again, make sure you run the pump at 24 hours or 12 hours at high speed to make sure it thoroughly mixes. So again, to bring up your alkalinity, you're gonna use your Alkalinity Plus. And typically the only time you're gonna use this Alkalinity Plus is if you made a mistake, if you added too much muriatic acid to the pool. Or sometimes if you're in the rainy season, especially here in Texas, a lot of methane in the atmosphere. When rainwater comes down, it comes down as acid rain, so it can drive your pH down. It could also drive that alkalinity down, and alkalinity is one you want to really keep your eyes on, okay? So again, to bring that alkalinity up, your Alkalinity Plus. And again, there really never should be a reason for you to have to bring it down unless it's coming down already because you're adding muriatic acid to the pool to lower the pH. So that's it on those two chemicals. We've talked about pH, we've talked about alkalinity. Now we're gonna skip down here to the very last chemical, which is cyanuric acid, okay? We're gonna talk about this guy before we talk about the chlorines, because before we start talking about introducing chlorines to the pool, we have to talk about getting the playing field right for those guys. So I'm gonna describe this beautiful pool here that I have behind me as the playing field, okay? I'm gonna kind of break this down almost kind of a football terms. Maybe y'all can understand this, make it simple for y'all. But the way the chlorine game works is that before you even introduce your chlorine into the pool, you have to get the playing field right. It means you have to protect your players. Who do you got to protect the players from? Well, that's the sun, the UV rays. The UV rays will evaporate your chlorine out of your pool quicker than quicker than the UV can evaporate water. Okay, so with that being said, you got to figure out how to protect those players. That's called cyanuric acid, also known as pool stabilizer. This is about the only level that I don't agree with on this entire chart. They consider 30 to 50 parts per million ideal when it comes to the levels on your cyanuric acid, also known as pool stabilizer. I like to keep it closer to 100. I like to keep, my ideal would be 80. I'm gonna compare this to SPF levels on sunblock. So for example, if you were to put a sunblock on that's SPF 30 to 50 and you go out to the beach all day, chances are you're probably gonna get more sun than you wanted to. You're gonna be burnt. Same thing with the chlorine. You're gonna burn off more chlorine than you want to, ultimately costing you a lot of money in the long run. This guy right here is responsible for you saving so much money that you could probably buy this pool again depending on how long you live in this house, because with the way prices on chlorine are going, I mean, it's very important to try to save and make that chlorine go as long as possible. Basically have a long game, a strong game. And how is that going to be made possible? By making sure that you protect your players, which is the chlorine, by protecting them with good healthy levels of cyanuric acid, being more around the 80 parts per million range. Okay, so always I recommend keeping it between 80 and about 100. Other people will tell you otherwise. Some people will tell you 100 is way too high. Well, if you get it anywhere past 100 parts per million, now you're creating like a dome over this pool. So now there's literally no chance for that chlorine to burn out of the pool. And you do have to burn out that old used chlorine. You don't want to keep it in there all the time. So that's the reason you don't want to get too high and don't want to get any higher than 100. At 100, you're still allowing that dead chlorine to evaporate, but still keep it in there long enough to keep it active. Okay? So if you let it get too low, you're just introducing chlorine way sooner than you should, and you're just going through a lot more money than you should. So this one right here is important for that reason, is to keep the chlorine in there for good extended periods of time. Now, how do you bring these levels up? Okay, well, let me introduce you to pool stabilizer. This is your pool stabilizer right here. That's the big print on the bucket. Now again, the brand doesn't matter. You can go find whatever brand you want. This is just what's available at the time being. Okay, now on these buckets, the most important thing is going to be this small print right here. On this guy, it says active ingredient. It says cyanuric acid, 100%. So this guy right here is a granule, and that granule right there is poured into the skimmer, and again with the skimmer basket in its place. Now, depending on what size pool, is going to depend on how much you add to it, but a good average, especially in the summertime, is about 2 pounds every other month of pool stabilizer. Now in a pool like this, it's a little bit bigger, it's 30,000 gallons, I would say about maybe 3 pounds every other month. Okay, the math is not that hard to do. Add a pound to the pool at a time. Come back and test it 24 hours later and see how much it increased, see how much it changed. You'll be able to figure out what those incremental values are and basically just multiply that very easily. So if you come back 24 hours later and you see that your shock was weak, maybe you could go a little bit stronger, add another pound and see how that works out for you. Okay, but you don't have to beat your brain up when you do the math on this stuff. Very simple. Okay, so again, pool stabilizer, this guy right here protects your chlorine in your pool. Okay, the next chemical we're going to talk about, we're going to skip up here to the second and third row. Now we're going to talk about the chlorine. We're going to talk about total chlorine, and we're going to talk about free chlorine. The important one there to me out of those two chlorines that I mentioned is the free chlorine. If you're doing a good job on balancing your pool, you should always have total chlorine in there. Okay, that's the total chlorine is basically the amount of active players and reserve players. That's basically the measurement of the entire team that's keeping this pool algae free. So you have 2 players on your team. You have your active players and you have your reserve players. Okay, your reserve players are going to be down here in this column that says free chlorine. Those are the important ones. That's your bench. Okay, these are the guys sitting on your bench ready to come in and replace these players that are in here burning themselves out with the UV rays. Okay, so when you're testing your water, you should have a game going. That's what's keeping the pool algae free, at least mostly. With that being said, that means if you have a game going on, you should have some kind of a reading in here, okay? But the important reading is figuring out how healthy your bench is so you can keep this game going without losing. Losing be this pool turning green on you because you forgot to replenish your pool with chlorine to keep it active, keep it healthy and strong, okay? So the way you're gonna keep the game going, the way you're gonna keep it healthy and strong is by ensuring that you always have a good amount of free chlorine. If you got a good amount of free chlorine, that means you got a strong bench to keep this game going over and over as long as you need. But if you let this bench dry up, eventually your game up here, which is your total chlorine, is over. And you start getting an algae full pool, you know, green. You don't want that. So anyways, going back to the chlorines here, the most important one is your free chlorine. Now, what's going to lower your chlorine, obviously I've already talked about it, it's going to be the UV rays. That's mainly what's going to do most of it. Other stuff's going to be you swimming in it and water dilution caused by rain. But again, your free chlorine is your important one. Now, in the summertime, it is going to be necessary that you have a kickoff, just like in football. You got to do a kickoff. You got to shock the pool. Okay, so you have to shock the pool once a week. Shock the pool is basically bringing your chlorine to the top of the chart. Okay, so basically off the charts high, if not most minimal, at the very top of this chart. Okay, so when you shock the pool, your chlorines, both of these, okay, your total and your free are going to skyrocket, which is what you want. Now, all of our equipment sets have a chlorinator located back at the equipment, which we talked about in our first mechanical video introduction. Now, with that chlorinator, that's basically your bench. It's full of 3-inch tablets. It's these guys right here. So these are your, what we call in the industry, 3-inch hockey pucks, okay? They're tablets. Depending on what brand they are, they're all gonna be different thicknesses. So how many tablets can the chlorinator fit? From the thinnest tablets, it can be 9. The thickest tablets, it can be 7. So anywhere between 9 and 7 tablets is typically the total amount that our dispenser that we install holds, okay? Now, it's important that you just keep that guy full all the time, unless it's like the winter time. But otherwise, here in Texas, it's important that you keep it full basically 99.9% of the time. So again, these are the 3-inch hockey pucks. That's what they look like. I'm not gonna touch them because I don't feel like getting stinky today with chlorine. Now, again, this is the bench. You wanna make sure it stays in that chlorine and full. That way you don't have any surprises. Now, you won't have any other surprises if you make sure you're protecting them with the cyanuric acid, okay? Now, on this bucket, on the small print, this one, very simple. Again, active ingredients. Right here it says, let's see. This is the important one on tablets. Available chlorine, okay? Available chlorine, this one says 90%. You wanna make sure that when you're buying tablets, they're minimum 90%. There's some that only have like 70%. They're garbage. You're basically dispensing more garbage into the pool than you are chlorine. So anytime you're buying your tablets, make sure you're buying a good, healthy chlorine tablet that has a minimum of 90% available chlorine. That is very important, okay? And again, these go in the dispenser at the equipment. And I typically suggest that you keep that chlorinator on maximum output, which is 5. And you can throttle down the output by throttling down your variable speed pump. Okay, so always keep your output on your chlorinator at 5, at least for most part. And if you see that you keep getting a constant high reading of chlorine on a weekly basis, then you can throttle down your high speed on your variable speed pump. Okay. Now, we're not done talking about chlorine. Okay, we still got to talk about shock. I know I mentioned it earlier when I talked about the kickoff. So I'm going to describe this, basically as a line chart, okay? So when you shock the pool, and depending on how big your pool is, it's going to depend on how much shock you use. Most shocks, typically, rule of thumb, is 1 pound of shock per every 10,000 gallons. So if it's a 30,000 gallon pool, easy math, 3 pounds of shock, okay? Now when you add your shock to your pool, again, avoid the steps, benches, sun shelves, throw it directly into the deep end of the pool. And very, very important, there's one chemical that you definitely want to make sure you run your variable speed pump on high for 12 to 24 hours. It is when you add shock. When you add shock, it is imperative that you run your pump at high speed for a minimum of 12 hours and also make sure that your cleaner is on for 12 hours. So set a countdown on your cleaner for 12 hours as well, because we want to make sure that cleaner vacuums up all those granules of shock off the bottom of the floor as quick as possible. We want that diluted. That's the best way that I like to dilute my shock. There's many ways to do it, but I like to just go ahead and throw that scoop of shock into the pool. But again, make sure that cleaner's on, and make sure your filter pump is on high speed for minimum of 12 to 24 hours. So again, we're introducing the shock into the pool. That's kickoff. So your chlorine is now off the charts high, which is what we want. Now, if you're protecting your chlorine as you should, if you've got the playing field right with the right amount of cyanuric acid, then after you kick off, you have your kickoff, or after you shock the pool, it should start to come back down. Your levels of chlorine should start to come back down and flatline through the middle of the week. If you can get that flatline to last you 2 weeks, even more money that you're saving, which is the ultimate goal. You want that chlorine to last you as long as possible. If it's 1 week because it's a dead heat of Texas and that's all you can get out of your cycle, then so be it. But if the weather starts to cool down and you can now progress the cycle to 2 weeks, even better, because it can be done. So how are you going to make sure that your chlorine doesn't go from high to low real quick? Is making sure that A, you got the right protectant in the pool when it comes to cyanuric levels, and B, you want to make sure that you're running your filter pump long enough hours, especially in high speed, to produce the chlorine coming out of the chlorinator that you need on a daily to weekly basis to keep the game going flatline. Because if you don't have your filter pump running at the right speed for the right periods of time, then you're not going to allow your players that are coming out of the chlorinator to come out and keep this game going healthy. Okay, you're going to let that game die down. So again, it's really important that you pay attention to your runtime on your filter pump and the speeds. That's going to contribute a lot to your chlorine levels. Okay, so again, your shock is basically going to get the chlorine level really high, and then your chlorine level in combination, or your chlorinator in combination with your filter pump, is going to help you kind of flatline that game for a week to 2. So it's normal at the end of 1 to 2 weeks for you to have 0 chlorine in the pool. That is completely normal. That's what you should expect on a weekly to bi-weekly basis, that you wind up with ultimately no chlorine. So at that point is when you have to start the process all over again of having to shock the pool, which is the kickoff, and then you having to make sure that you keep that chlorinator full of tablets at the right output level and at the right speeds on the filter pump. So again, that is how you keep chlorine in your pool. You keep chlorine in your pool through shocking your pool, and you keep chlorine in your pool by making sure you keep tablets in your dispenser and making sure your filter pump is running at healthy levels for right amounts of time. Okay. On shock, I want to introduce you to the shock. We've talked about the tablets. Now we're going to talk about the shock. The shock is right here. Very important as well when it comes to the fine print on the label. Okay, so it says minimum available chlorine, 70%. Okay, you can find it a little bit stronger, but I don't recommend anything lower than 70%. If you buy anything lower than this, you're buying waste. Okay, so again, when you're buying your chlorine, make sure that you look at your minimum available balance of chlorine. Okay, there's going to be different bases of shock. You can buy lithium shock, that's very easy to dissolve, really expensive, or you can buy the other stuff, which is the calcium hypochlorite, which is what I use all the time. Just make sure that it gets sucked off the bottom of the pool quick, and you're good to go with this stuff. So you don't have to spend the big money on the stuff that's lithium based or anything else. The calcium hypochlorite will work just fine, but again, the important stuff is the minimum chlorine available. Okay, so that's your shock. And again, when you add your shock, you add that into the deeper part of the pool. So let's recap on what we've talked about. We started off by talking about the pH. Then we talked about how by lowering pH, you can also affect the alkalinity. We talked about the cyanuric acid, which is what we use to get the playing field right for our next 2 players, which was our total chlorine and our free chlorine. Again, the free chlorine is the important one. And again, there's your levels. You want to keep them right down the middle. Okay. The last chemical we're going to talk about is going to be your total hardness. So if you have a new pool, it is going to be totally normal that you have low hardness when you get your readings back for at least 3 to 6 months. For sure 3 months, and it can last up to 6 months. At the end of 6 months, if your calcium is still low, at that point is when I suggest that you add calcium to your pool. Don't add calcium to your pool prematurely, because what's going to happen is, being that this pool is new, it's still releasing a lot of minerals into the pool. Is releasing one of those minerals is calcium. Okay, so again, being that it's releasing calcium, and it's going to be releasing calcium for a few months, you don't want to get ahead of the game and start adding calcium to it, because if you do that, now you're going to have a calcium line develop a lot sooner on your tile. Okay, so you want to avoid that as long as you can. I mean, getting that white calcium line on your tile is going to be unavoidable, but you definitely don't want to contribute to making it worse anytime sooner. So don't get ahead of yourself. Don't add any calcium to your pool for at least the first 6 months. At that point, once you get to the 6 month mark, you can go ahead and start adding some calcium to the pool as needed. I have some calcium here. This one right here in this bucket right here is your calcium increaser. Okay, and again, it has a chart on the back, just like the others, to cross-reference and figure out how much you need. And when you add this calcium increaser, I add it through the skimmer as well. So add your calcium increaser through your skimmer, but again, make sure you keep your basket in place. So we've talked about all the main chemicals. We have a few more chemicals to talk about. We're going to talk about an Algaecide, okay? An Algaecide 60. Okay, so when you go to the chemical store, if they're testing your water, they might come back and tell you that you have high levels of phosphates in the water, in the pool. Now you're asking yourself what phosphates are. Phosphates are basically food for algae. So in other words, whenever you do get your algae bloom, which you are going to get, it's going to be unavoidable, even if your chemicals are right on the money. Typically, you're going to get algae blooms wherever the sun hits the pool the most during the day. So in those areas where the swimming pool is getting a lot of sunlight, that's the very first place you're going to get that algae bloom. You'll get small pockets of it, but if your chemicals are right on the money, you should be able to brush that algae right off the wall at ease, okay, with not much work. Now, if you go brushing that algae and it's stubborn and it's taking you some elbow grease, then I would suggest stop what you're doing and go ahead and treat your pool with the right chemicals, starting with shock. Make sure your pH is balanced right, but shock would be the main player at that point. Shock your pool, wait 24 to 48 hours, then come back and brush it, and it should just disappear really quick. But again, you will get that algae bloom even if all your chemicals are right on the money. So when you get that algae bloom is when phosphates kick into effect. Phosphates are food for algae. So the higher number of phosphates you have there, the more food you have for them. Well, you can combat the phosphates by adding phosphate remover to the pool. But in my years of building pools, I have found that phosphate remover can actually roughen up plasters. And if it's doing that to plasters, I don't want to imagine what it's doing to the inside of your heater, that copper radiator we talked about earlier. So again, stay away from phosphate removers. And what I suggest is an Algaecide 60. An Algaecide 60 is not going to get rid of the phosphates in the pool, but what it is going to do, it's going to dissolve that seed of algae that's hiding in your filter. Because after you brush that algae bloom away from your wall, it's eventually going to make its way back to the filter. And that algae sits there as a seed, ready to bloom and spread its ugly face onto the walls of your pool as soon as the water gets warm enough again, and as soon as the chlorine gets low. So again, if you treat your pool with an Algaecide 60, you will ensure that you're basically getting rid of that seed of algae that's in your filter. Again, how much you add of this to your pool? About 1 ounce to every 10,000 gallons, okay? Every time you treat your pool. So that's your Algaecide 60. This is another one of those bonus chemicals that most pool guys don't carry with them. So if you're maintaining your own pool, good for you. I'm glad you are. You should, because this is not that hard and it doesn't take that much time. So again, make sure you're using this stuff, okay? So now, actually, before I end up with this, there's more expensive products in this. You don't have to buy this exact one. There's Algaecide 60s that contain silver in them. The ones that contain silver in them are the best ones. I suggest you get those. They're a little bit more pricey, but algae hates silver. So if you can put a little silver in your pool, you can keep the green out of your pool a lot longer. Okay. All right. So with that being said, we talked about most of the chemicals. The only other thing that comes to mind when it comes to chemicals is muriatic acid and cleaning your tile line, okay? Within time, you are gonna have that sweat mark, that calcium line build on the tile. The best thing to use to get rid of it is straight muriatic acid in an old spray bottle, old Windex bottle. Now, save the sprayers because you might go through a few of the sprayers as you're cleaning your pool because it heats up the mechanism inside, the spring mechanism. So if you're anything like me, you're an OCD freak, while the family's in there swimming, you'll probably be in there cleaning and scrubbing, which is what I recommend for the first 3 years. As much as you don't want to hear that, yeah, if you do that, after the first 3 years, your pool will always look like new. But being that your pool is releasing so many minerals for the first years, you want to make sure that you stay on top of that. If you don't do that, you will have to hire a professional company to come in and bead blast all that calcium off your tile, and it's going to be expensive. So again, you can either go that route or be the neat freak and just get out there and clean. And I suggest to use, again, straight muriatic acid in a spray bottle and a wire brush, a stainless steel wire brush. If you go to Home Depot, in their tool department, right next to the welders, in particularly right next to the welding gloves, you'll find two stainless steel bristle brushes. One that is actually stainless steel, it's silver. The other one is a bronze brush. It's a lot softer. I don't suggest the bronze bristle. I suggest the stainless steel bristle. They're going to be hanging right next to each other at Home Depot. Again, get a couple of them, not one, get a couple of them. You're going to need them. Sometimes you might even need a flathead screwdriver to get the more stubborn white calcium off the tile. Don't be afraid to scratch it. You won't, okay? So again, anytime you see any of that white sweat build up on your tile, on your water line, use muriatic acid to clean it off. And the sooner the better. Other than that, I don't know if I missed, oh no, let's talk about evaporation on a pool. Last but not least, let's talk about evaporation. So the water balance in the pool. It is going to be normal for your pool to lose, and I think I talked about this in my previous video, but I'll recap on that again. It is going to be normal if you lose 1.5 inches up to 3 inches per week in the summertime due to evaporation, especially if you have a pool with a big radiator on it, okay? When you have a pool with waterfalls like this, you can lose a lot more water because you're exposing all that water to that atmosphere and you're running it. So yeah, you're going to lose a lot more water. So with that being said, in the winter, you can lose double that amount of water because of all the cold, dry air, the wind that we get through here. So every time you replenish the pool with water, again, you're going to be getting a lot of the metals. So make sure that you're following up with your metal out. If you're not, you're going to wind up staining your pool, and it's not going to be pleasing to see. Otherwise, if y'all have any questions, any comments, if there's anything that you know, that you see, that you observe that could have made this video better, please feel free to make your comments, and I'll be more than happy to make more videos to help you get educated on making sure that you maintain your pool looking new and algae free for many years to come. Other than that, I hope I didn't make things too difficult, and enjoy many years of good, happy swimming. Take care, everybody.